When she was auctioned off like a worthless item, with a sack covering her face, no one could see the true person inside. A solitary man, without family or friends, only the forest as his companion, decided to pay $3 to buy her, not for any reason other than empathy, a pity he could not refute. And then, when she spoke and revealed her name, his entire world changed. What makes a man willing to tie his life to a woman he doesn't even know what she might bring to his life? This story is not only about saving someone, but about how a fragile heart can change everything, even when life seems to have no way out. Their story will make you ask, do you have enough courage to save a stranger? And could that change you forever? In a small town, where the shadows of the trees stretched long across the dirt roads, life seemed to pass by steadily. But there were always those whose fates were drowned in silence. The story of the woman we are about to tell began there, in a place where the forests were not just a home, but a witness to much pain and abandonment. She was a woman with no family, no home, no love, or care from anyone around her. People only knew her as a poor girl, abandoned and unwanted, even though she was just a life no one bothered to look at. When she appeared in an auction, her head covered by an old sack, no one in the crowd could guess that she was a soul forgotten. She didn't speak, didn't show any resistance, just a faint shadow raised for auction, like a cheap item. No one remembered her name, and that was why she was just an anonymous object in the eyes of those around her. She didn't need to say anything because society had already decided for her that she was worthless. Perhaps she had grown used to being ignored, to the feeling of being left behind after everything around her had turned its back. Opposite her was a lonely man. He was not rich, nor powerful in the town. He was just a woodcutter with rough hands and a dusty old shirt. He was not a man of many words, nor did he have friends. His life passed in silence and forest rains, where he was used to keeping company with himself, with the animals in the woods, and even with the rushing winds. He didn't need anyone, but he felt something deep within him was missing. Perhaps, in his lonely world, he found understanding for those who had no place in society, those who had no one to care for or protect them. And then he did what no one expected. He bought her. With just $3, he gave a small amount of money to take a woman with no name and nowhere to go. Why did he do it? Perhaps the simple answer is that he couldn't bear to see her abandoned again, couldn't let another life continue to be buried in forgetfulness. He bought her not because he wanted to do something grand, but because he felt a deep empathy he couldn't ignore. He knew he couldn't change the world, but he could change the life of a woman sinking in darkness. That was the moment he realized that sometimes love and salvation don't come from grand promises, but from small actions, from the courage to do what others would consider meaningless. But did the girl recognize her worth after everything she had been through? What would she do when given the chance to live a new life? Not as someone saved by another, but as someone saving herself in the arms of a man who expected nothing from her other than her presence in his life. And perhaps, in each person's life, there are moments where choices must be made. A choice to believe in change, to believe that one can have a fresh start, even if it comes from the smallest of things. My personal perspective is that we often judge people's worth based on what they have or what they can offer. However, this story reminds us that a person's true value is not determined by what's outside of them, but by what they have inside. Just like the girl in the story, when no one noticed her, when society rejected her, only a lonely man saw her true self, and that was enough to change her life. This story is not just about love, but about kindness and empathy between people in a world full of wrongdoing and indifference. The defining moment came when the girl in the old sack first spoke and said her name. It was a moment everyone seemed to have forgotten, yet it sparked a deep truth that couldn't be denied. The name Callie rang out like a small dot marking the emergence of a character in the lonely man's life. When she spoke, everything was no longer meaningless numbers on the auction board. She was no longer an item, no longer an anonymous object, but a human being with emotions, a past, and a story untold. And in that moment, what happened in the man's heart? When Collie said her name, it wasn't just the silence of the crowd waiting for a higher bid, but something heavy, even suffocating in the air. For the man, the name was not just information or identification, it was a call, an echo from a forgotten life, a reminder of someone who had been rejected by society, someone no longer valuable in the eyes of those living in the light. Other names, those of other people, could easily be forgotten in the crowd. But this name touched something in the man's heart, something he couldn't ignore. At that moment, the story was no longer about auctioning a human, but about a choice. The choice the man faced was not just to spend a little money to save a woman from a cruel auction, but to accept a life uncertain, a bond he couldn't explain with simple logic. He didn't need to know her past, didn't need to understand all the pain she had been through. He just needed to hear that name and see the helpless look of a person abandoned. That was enough for him to feel a connection. In that instant, he realized that not everyone could bear their own loneliness, and that some people, even when rejected by society, still had a dignity that couldn't be broken. For everyone in the crowd, her name was just a small event, a meaningless event they never expected. But for the man, it was the opening of a new door. In that moment, everything changed. He didn't just see a woman left behind, but a soul still alive amidst the stormy seas. Others may see her as a discarded item, but he saw a person, a life with a future. And perhaps that's what made him stand up and do what no one thought he would do: spend $3 to save a life. But could $3 save a person? And could the girl find herself again after everything she had been through? Though $3 was not a large sum, for the man, it was all he could do at that moment. It wasn't an act of generosity, but of deep empathy. He had no reason to save her, except the understanding that in this society, someone like her could be forgotten forever if no one was brave enough to recognize her value. The man didn't just save her from loneliness and humiliation at the auction, but saved her from a life discarded and determined by society. He didn't save her with promises or grand reasons, but with a small action from someone who didn't want to see that injustice continue. This event was not only a turning point in the story, but also a turning point in Kali's journey of self-rescue, because when she said her name, it wasn't just informing others of who she was, but affirming that she existed, that she had a name, and that name deserved to be mentioned, deserved to be loved. It was the moment when a person could finally take control of their life, after society had long considered them a silent ghost. I believe that in life, not everyone gets a second chance, and not everyone can recognize the small but important moments in their lives. It is such events that change the fate of forgotten people. Sometimes, a name is all a person needs to change, and Callie's name not only carries personal value but symbolizes a new hope, a new beginning. That name, though simple, carries all the hopes, pains, and dreams not yet realized. It was the turning point for both her and the lonely man to find a way out for themselves, though the road ahead would not be easy. In this story, I see that everyone, no matter how much they've suffered, still has the right to determine their own fate, not by external conditions, but by their own decisions. They can stand up, rise, and change their life with a courageous act, like the man did when he chose to save Kali. The truth is, we never know who we will become in the eyes of others, but what matters is that we know who we are and what we deserve. After stepping out of the dark auction, the lonely man and Kali began their journey together. This journey was not just a journey of space, but a journey of the soul, where both had to face not only the external challenges of the world but also their own inner battles. Both Kali and the man, with their pasts full of pain and loneliness, faced an important choice. Could they overcome the darkness within themselves to build a new life? One where the sorrows and sadness of the past no longer haunted them. That was when they both began to find change, in moments of silent sharing, in times they had to face their fears, and more importantly, in the way they began to trust each other. From the moment they left the town, Callie felt the strangeness and suffocating atmosphere of this new world. She didn't know how long this journey would last, nor did she know what she would find at the end of the road. Everything seemed uncertain, much like the dusty dirt roads the man led her through. She still carried skepticism in her heart, but his glances, the gentle gestures he gave her, slowly began to soothe the deep wounds inside her. Callie couldn't explain this feeling, but there was something in his silence that made her feel secure, as though, even without words, she could still feel his care. The lonely man asked nothing of Callie, and it was this lack of demands that made her feel at ease. She had grown used to being seen as a burden, a useless thing in the eyes of society, but he didn't see her that way. He didn't ask about her past, didn't dig into the deep wounds she had carried for all those years. Instead, he quietly accompanied her on this journey, not with advice or criticisms, but simply by being there, with empathy that required no words. This made Callie slowly realize that she could have a chance to find herself, a chance to be loved, without needing to give anything in return. What I see in this story is one of the most important lessons about change and challenge. Sometimes, change doesn't come from external conditions, but from how we perceive and face ourselves. Callie didn't need a miracle. She didn't need salvation from a man of power or wealth. She just needed someone patient enough to listen to her, sensitive enough to see her true self without judgment. On this journey, Callie began to realize that she could change, not because someone told her to, but because she had started to feel that she deserved the chance to live a better life. And this was the second turning point in her journey, when she realized that change wasn't a battle with the outside world, but a conversation with herself. But the challenges were not always easy. Although their first steps together were gentle and peaceful, life isn't easy to change, and the ghosts of the past always find a way to come back. One night, when they set up camp to rest, Callie suddenly woke up with a start as nightmares flooded her mind, bringing back images of the forgotten past. She remembered the days she was abandoned, the times she saw pitying glances from others, the humiliations she had to endure throughout her life. She shuddered, unable to understand why these painful memories were resurfacing so forcefully. But then, the man, with his strong and patient hands, pulled her out of the cycle of suffering. He didn't need to say anything. He simply sat by her side, allowing her to cry, to release the emotions she had been suppressing for so long. It was in these moments that Callie began to realize that not everything could be healed immediately. Change wasn't a miracle, but a slow and arduous process. And sometimes, it came gradually. But what mattered was that Callie was no longer alone. She had someone by her side, someone who would never let go, no matter how powerful the waves crashed. The man didn't just save her from a cruel auction. He also helped her save herself, from the painful memories, from the cold words of society, and from the fears deep inside her. For me, what makes this story so special is that it's not just a typical love story, but a story of salvation from the people whom society often deems worthless. Sometimes, salvation doesn't come from grand ideals or monumental actions, but from simply listening, from being present together in silent moments, and more importantly, from acceptance. The man didn't try to change Callie. He only showed her that she deserved to be loved and valued. With simple actions and a sincere heart, he helped her realize that she could live a better life, and, more importantly, that she could love herself. This reminds me of a truth. In life, sometimes we don't need to do something huge to change someone else's life. A simple gesture, a sincere word, or just our presence is enough. And that's the important lesson I think we all need to remember. Sometimes, salvation doesn't come from great deeds, but from acceptance and patience, helping each other through challenges that seem insurmountable. As the story reaches its climax, the challenges and hardships that Callie and the lonely man must face seem to be just the preparatory stages for a final confrontation. This is the moment where both must not only fight the fears inside them, but also face the outside world, where prejudice, judgment, and relentless difficulties threaten them. After all they've been through, will they be able to sustain the changes they've made? Or will they be swept away by the whirlwind of the past and the tough choices ahead? Callie, although she had found some healing and self-awareness in her days with the man, still couldn't completely escape the shadow of her past. Old wounds couldn't be healed by just a short journey, and though she had learned to trust in herself and in the man, the fear of a life trapped in loneliness still loomed. Everything changed when they encountered a major challenge. They had to face those from the past, people in society who would never accept the disruption of order that Callie and the man were creating. They were no longer just strange figures in the eyes of everyone. Now, they were standing before a battle not only to protect their new lives, but to prove that the values they had built were right and deserved to be respected. The price of freedom is never cheap, and when they began to feel the peace of their new life, that was when they had to face their greatest trial. The people in the town, those who had once judged and cast aside Callie, now returned like ghosts from the past. They didn't come to admit their wrongs or seek forgiveness, but to assert their power, to show that they still held everything, from authority to acceptance. In a moment, the man saw that all he had done, all the hopes he had placed in Callie, were now being tested in the most brutal way. But nothing in life is simple, and he understood that in life, the most precious things are often paid for with resilience and courage. The story's climax didn't come from a physical struggle, but from a battle in the soul. Callie, standing before those who had once seen her as a discarded item, finally realized that she was the one with the power to decide her life, not anyone else. When the people from the town came and began forcing her back into what they considered right and acceptable, Callie realized that she could no longer live in the shadow of others' approval. She didn't need validation from anyone anymore because she was the one who decided her own value. The decisions she made today were not to please the people in the town, but to prove that she could build a new life where no one had the right to decide for her. When faced with judgment from the old crowd, Callie no longer bowed her head or hid. She stood tall, looked them straight in the eyes, and what she said was not a plea, but an affirmation of her right to live. All the submission and fear of the past were torn away, replaced with a strong, resilient, and self-sufficient woman. This was the moment Callie was no longer the weak girl, no longer the one abandoned in the dark, but a victor, someone standing firm against all hardships. She had the strength to claim that she deserved a happy life, whether with the man she loved or on her own, as long as she had the right to choose. In that moment, the man standing beside Callie was not a protector or savior, but a companion, a witness to her transformation. He didn't need to do anything grand. His presence alone was enough for Callie to realize that she was no longer alone. He had trusted her, and that trust helped her find her own confidence. This story is not just about a man saving a woman, but about equality in love, support, and mutual respect. He didn't make her someone else. He helped her realize herself, helped her become the strongest version of herself. I believe this story carries a profound message about rising in life, not for anyone else, but for ourselves. Change is not an easy path, and sometimes facing the greatest challenges is the only way we realize our own strength. Callie didn't need anyone to protect her. She needed to be stronger than ever, and the man was simply the one who helped her realize that. From being a nameless girl in the eyes of society to a woman who knew how to stand up for herself, this story proves that sometimes true salvation comes from within, and only when we are ready to face the difficulties can we truly change our lives. Kali's story and the lonely man's story made me think about a simple thing. Freedom and the right to live are not things given to us, but things we must take, and when we take them, we truly understand our own worth. After the decisive confrontation, when Kaylee was no longer the weak girl judged and despised, but a woman who dared to stand up, face herself, and the world, her story entered a new phase. This phase was not just the end of a battle, but the beginning of a life where Kali could freely determine her own fate, no longer bound by the opinions of others. And that, to me, is the most important part of this journey. When a person can decide their own worth, even when the world around them no longer believes in them. When Kali and the man left the town, there were no more judgmental stares, no more whispers or stigmas from those who had once thought of her as nothing more than a woman with a painful past. They found a new space, one where the ghosts of the past no longer chased them. But even though the people from the town might have walked away and stopped interfering in their lives, there was one truth Kali could not avoid. The past could never be easily erased. This wasn't a bad thing, but a challenge she needed to overcome in order to truly accept herself. Kali no longer had to fight with the outside world. At this point, the real battle she faced was with herself. When she realized that she had the right to build a new life, it didn't mean she would never face fear or doubt again. The truth was, every person starting a new life must overcome their own shadows. The shadows from their past, from the pain that can't be erased. Kali had to learn how to face feelings of inferiority, memories of being abandoned, and the absence of love. And throughout this process, the man was not her savior, but her companion, standing by her side, not to teach or change her, but to prove that she had the strength to change herself. After everything she had been through, Kali's transformation wasn't a surprise, but the result of a process of acceptance and growth. She realized that loving and taking care of herself wasn't an act of selfishness, but a necessary step toward living a happy life. This is why, when Kaylee and the man decided to live together, they were no longer just two abandoned people, but two individuals who had found peace in their own lives. They were not seeking perfection, but honesty and empathy, a safe space where each person could be themselves. When looking back at their journey, I see that real change doesn't come from big decisions or special events. In reality, the most significant moments of change in life often come from simple things, from finding peace in the little things. Kali didn't need to do anything grand to prove her worth. She only needed to live true to herself, no longer fearing or doubting. This is the important lesson that I think we all need to learn. Finding freedom and happiness isn't something that can be searched for outside. It lies in our ability to love and accept ourselves. When they began to rebuild their lives, they didn't start from scratch, but from a deep understanding of themselves. Kali wasn't a perfect woman, but she had learned to love everything that made her who she was, including the wounds of her past. And I think, for each of us, self-acceptance is the prerequisite for loving others and building a happy life. If we cannot love ourselves, how can we fully love others? But it wasn't only Kali who changed. The man also underwent a transformation throughout this journey. Before meeting Kali, he lived in a solitary world, believing that freedom and happiness could only be achieved by living alone. But Kali, with her strength and resilience, taught him that true happiness isn't something that can only be attained when a person faces the world by themselves. True happiness comes from sharing, from accepting and supporting each other through challenges. He had found a companion, not because he needed salvation, but because he realized that life is never complete without connection, empathy, and love. In the end, I feel that no ending is ever truly an end. It is simply a new beginning, a transfer of hopes and new dreams. Kali and the man no longer lived for each other alone, but lived for themselves, for the ability to change and for the freedom they had found. And that is what makes this story so special. It's not a story of salvation by someone else. but a story about how each person can save themselves, stand up, and create the life they truly deserve. Finally, the story of Kali and the lonely man is not just a love story, but a journey of self-discovery, a testament to the strength that everyone has inside them to change and rise after the fall. They didn't just build a new life for themselves, but also proved that happiness and freedom do not come from what others decide for us, but from our own acceptance and self-love. Sometimes, salvation doesn't come from someone else, but from our ability to believe in ourselves and keep moving forward, no matter how painful the past may be. This story will make you reflect on yourself and the decisions we make in life. Do we have enough courage to change? Can we stand firm and love ourselves, no matter how the world sees us? Leave your thoughts in the comments below this video. Can you relate Kali's story to your own life? Share your story with us, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on more inspiring stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.